My name is Dr. Kim Ridealgh, and I'm an Associate Professor of Sociolinguistics at the School of Politics, Philosophy, Language and Communication Studies at the University of East Anglia. Today I'm going to talk to you about the power of word choice, and in particular we're going to look at how language can be used to divide or unite us. When we think about language, there's lots of different things that we need to think about, but fundamentally, the way that we choose what we're going to say is driven by our underlying belief and view of the world, and we'll select words appropriate to that belief. And so, when there are key figures like politicians or activists who are trying to persuade people to see and share their point of view, they'll select language that is designed to entice, to persuade, or to get others to agree to that view. And this is what we'll look at in today's talk. So we quite often take language for granted. And so quite often as well, when we take it for granted, it means that we don't pick up perhaps on the nuances that exist within language. We only tend to pay attention to language when something has gone wrong. For example, over the summer, there was a case of a professor in America who was using Chinese in a class, but there are certain words in Chinese that sound like a racial slur in English. Particularly the filler word, which is like but what they use in China. And so, there was a complaint made about that. And so, the minute you hear something that in your own language sounds really socially inappropriate or offensive, you pay attention to it, not realizing that maybe it might mean something entirely different in another language. We also have changes in our language that have happened really quickly and really recently, particularly to do with COVID and the lockdown. So, here we've got an example of a new way of communicating, stay safe, how are you, hope you're doing well, look after yourself. All of this language didn't really exist before lockdown. But now that we've got this shared communal experience of the pandemic and of lockdown, we've shifted our language to kind of reflect that in how we greet and how we sign off emails. And we also tend to pay attention when new words come about or if we're passionate about the topic. So climate change, for example, has generated a whole new range of words, of language. I've just given you here a clip of, going green. Well, this didn't exist before we really understood about climate change. So, we've got new words coming about COVID, the pandemic, everything from lateral flow tests to PCR tests to lockdown to social distancing. These are all new words and phrases for many different cultures, many different languages. Social distance didn't exist in different cultures. And so they've had to create new words for it as they move forward. So there's lots of things that have emerged recently in our language because the need for the language has come about, but it does impact our language, and we do tend to notice when new things happen. So in this talk today, then, we're going to look at what we mean by discourse and power, what we mean by ideology, and how exactly we can manipulate language for a specific purpose, and how these are deployed in order to persuade audiences. So to do this, first of all, we need to understand how we study language and what it means to say that our language is a system. I'm also going to be using this word a lot, discourse. So discourse refers to text or language longer than a sentence or utterance. It can be anything. It can even be spoken discourse, but it has to be longer than a sentence. And it has to rely on knowledge outside of that example as well, or outside of that discourse. And discourse describes the ideology underlying and structuring certain discussions, talks, or text. And it can a discourse can refer to anything. It could be a transcript of an interview, it could be the interview itself, it could be a picture from a magazine, or it could be, this PowerPoint here, my talk today. So this is all examples of different discourse samples, and I'm going to refer to discourse samples throughout this talk. So power is a really important sociolinguistic variable, sometimes called extralinguistic variable within sociolinguistics, and it allows us to understand the influence that power has on society, on the lingua cultures that we're studying, and on language, because generally power is asymmetric. A social dimension of something that we refer to as relative power, which means essentially in the communication who holds the power. So if we're looking at an unequal relationship, which occurs in all societies throughout time, you're going to have people who fall into certain roles who will have power within that dynamic. So student, teacher, the teacher has power there. The boss, the employee, the boss has power. And these people have power because they can change your status. You know, the boss could fire you, the teacher could put you in detention. Then they have power over you. And so that permeates the language that they can use when they speak to you and their behaviors within that social relationship. So one person may be said to have power over another in the degree that they are able to control the behavior of the other. Power is a relationship between at least two people. It's not necessarily reciprocal in the sense that they both cannot have power in the same area of behavior. Sometimes we'll certainly say that power is negotiable, but they both can't hold the same high power at the same time. Otherwise, you know, it's totally an equal relationship. You can't then look at the effect of power. You'd be looking at a different variable. And of course, power can be enforced through a variety of different ways. It could be physical, from somebody's physical appearance, their physical strength, that could assert power, their status. So as we just mentioned, teacher, boss. The example on the right-hand side is of a police interview. So, you know, the police officer here controls the narrative, they control the relationship status, and they have the power within that relationship because they can control what the witness says, when they say it, and for how long they say it. And one of the key things you'll notice here, just get my mouse to work, is that, you know, the witness tries to answer, and then the police officer comes in straight away with a further question because they've got the information that they need. So they have the active voice in that discussion, and that's one way of demonstrating that they have the power within the police officer witness relationship dynamic. So there's lots of way that, you know, power is enforced, and sometimes without realizing it, we'll fall into one of these roles and we'll understand that we have power, or we'll understand that we don't have power. So if we're going to look at how power influences language, then, you know, we have to understand what we mean by language as an abstract concept. So language has two complementary dimensions. It's a system with which we interact with another and with, you know, people in our community. And it's also a system with which we exchange pictures of the world's ideas. So on the right-hand side here, you have exactly how communication with another person, you know, functions and how it works. So you've got the sender of a message encoding that message, perhaps in speech, or perhaps they're typing it onto a computer. But they're encoding how they see the world into their language. It goes along the channel as a message, and the channel could be social media, it could be, you know, voice, speech, it could be television. These are all channels. And then once the receiver picks up the message, they decode it. And, you know, they'll never decode it in the exact same way as the sender envisioned, because they're a different person with a different perspective on the world. But at all this time as well, you've got the what we call noise. So this is the ability to disrupt the messaging. It could be, you know, actual background noise, or it could be other ideas, other interactions, other people getting involved and somehow affecting the quality of the message which is going along the channel. And so again, it could affect the decoding of the receiver. So, you know, these two complementary dimensions are always working together to ensure successful communication, but sometimes successful communication is not necessarily achieved in the way that it was envisioned, and you have lots of points in which other people's perspective of the world can impact on how they decode a message from a sender. So we can understand it as a device then through which we create and exchange meaning. And as we're all individuals in how we receive information and how we view the world, you know, this creating and exchanging meaning can differ between different individuals. It's perhaps really noticeable when someone's trying to encode a message with very extreme ideas. Picking up and interpreting those extreme ideas, we can do as well from a scientific perspective. So we can do it from an observer perspective. And this is what we do when we look at something like critical discourse analysis, which is what we're going to be picking up in today's talk. So language and discourse then, a meaning exchange system constructed from elements. And these elements refer to things like words, clauses, you know, all those grammatical aspects that you're probably learning about in subjects like English language and English linguistics. But it also includes, you know, a massive part of how people see the world, their social life, you know, how they view and categorize and stereotype the world around them. So discourse is language plus context, or language use as part of a social system of interconnected elements. And this is a quote from Fairclough, who is essentially one of the main scholars in founding discourse analysis, and in particular critical discourse analysis. So we can never escape from language and context. We need the context to make sense of the language, and this is what fundamentally forms discourse. So there is a difference between reading a piece of discourse and actually doing active discourse analysis. So when we're looking at a discourse sample and we want to understand what's going on, so perhaps we want to look at persuasive language and how it's working, we're going to be identifying patterns of linguistic choice that underline various levels of meaning. It's the what is happening in this discourse sample. We're also going to identify the linguistic choices that reflect or support the specific discourse function. This is the why aspect. Why has that happened? Why has the producer of that discourse chosen to say something in that way? And then we're going to identify the connection between language use and social structures, with a particular aim to uncover examples in which language uses reproduces or constructs social inequalities or misrepresents reality. So this is, tying into the framework of critical discourse analysis, which is a method, which is a theoretical approach that allows us to understand what's going on in a particular example of discourse. It could be anything from looking at actually what's happening in that newspaper article or what's happening in that speech. What is happening? Why is it happening? And what's actually going on there? So these are the three things that we're going to look at as we move forward with critical discourse analysis. And this goes beyond just reading a text and giving an opinion. We're looking for patterns within that discourse sample. So critical discourse analysis works on the presumption that choices and how discourse is created are rarely just chance. Usually there is a motivation behind them. And when we meet to go through to meet for the tutorial, we'll have a look at a lot more examples of this and see if we can work out ways to analyze the motivation behind creating certain discourse samples. And, the discourse samples can also include images as well as kind of spoken text. And I've given you an example here on the right-hand side, which is originally from the Sun newspaper, but it's almost this discourse sample has two kind of things going in at once. You have the picture, which is the advert, and then you have the writing in there. And so this is from TUI about going to Turkey. And here the advert was found to be misleading. So it had to be removed. If we look at the advert on its own, it looks like you've got a beautiful exotic destination. You've got the prices there. You've got indication that it's protected as well by APTA. So, if the holiday falls through, it's not, you'll get your refund. But what you can't see very clearly in the advert, because there's the sun shining on the sea, is you've got a bit more detail about what it actually means, and you can see the dates here. So it says the 1st of September all the way through to the end of October, which is not really a summer holiday. So this was pegged as a summer holiday, and you've got the sun shining, you've got beautiful weather in the image, and you're attracted mostly to the image when you look at it. And then you've got TUI in red, and you've got the logo of TUI, which looks like a winking face with a big smile. And so you're drawn in immediately to the price as well. And what that does is it distracts you really from the terms and conditions that are at the bottom in very small writing that are, partially overlapped by the reflection of the sun. So, that reflection of the sun there is what we call noise. It's disrupting the message, but it's deliberately disrupting the message, essentially. And so I've taken this whole advert, the advert and the newspaper article come from the Sun. And you can then see how the Sun, the author of the newspaper article here, is referring to the fact that this advert is misleading. So you can then look at, okay, you've got a headline, then you've got the advert itself, and then at the bottom you've got this TUI advert was deemed to be misleading and has been banned. So, you can see how they're positioning the advert against the words within their own newspaper article to have a maximum impact here. And so, this is quite deliberate. The choices here are deliberate. And, you can always think while you're analysing this is, it's always worthwhile to consider the alternatives. What could have been presented instead of this? What could have been presented instead of this type of advert? How could they have made it clearer that actually it's an autumnal holiday, not a summer holiday? And then how could the Sun newspaper itself have presented an alternative to saying that this advert was misleading? And if there is an alternative there, then that's interesting as well, because it means that these individuals, both from TUI and then from the Sun newspaper, they've decided to present this in a certain manner, in a certain way, and then you have to look at why they've done that. There are, of course, campaigns where we can really see this happening. So if we have a look at political slogans, for example, political slogans work because there are a few words that are easy to remember, and they get associated then with the person who is saying it. So if you have a look at the top one, get Brexit done, that was part of the Conservative campaign for Brexit. It's catchy and it ties into a certain belief from their voter base that Brexit wasn't moving fast enough, for example. And you've got it in colours that are eye-catching. Brexit being in red, really makes it bold. And then if you have a look at this, in opposition to this, if you have a look at the bottom one, Make America Great Again. This was Trump's campaign slogan from the States, obviously. And again, this is tapping into a certain idea that is held by the people who vote for him, that America is currently not great. It's too much liberalism. So it's harkening back to a time where his voters feel America was at its strongest and was at its strength, the peak of its history. But, Make America Great Again. Well, when was it great before? There's an interesting word choice there. He could have had Make America Great, but he's added the again. Who does that appeal to? Why choose that particular word? What purpose does it serve? And if you have a look at all of these slogans, you can see the same thing going on here. This idea of strong, stable leadership in the national interest. Why? Who does that speak to? So, it's not a coincidence that certain political campaigns choose certain slogans. They want to appeal to their key voter base, and so they'll tap into some fundamental ideology that key voter base holds. And remember, ideology refers to somebody's view of the world, their belief about how the world is structured and shaped. So ideology then is a way of thinking about the world and can impact and affect thought and behaviour. Viewing ideologies, it is much easier to view ideologies within the term of politics, because quite often political parties get connected with certain ideologies. This has to do with beliefs about the proper organisation of society and how to achieve and maintain the goals that this entails. I've just given you an image here of certain political spectrum, and the types of behaviour that are associated with, the left leaning part of the spectrum and the right side of it as well. Because you can see predictable patterns among people who hold these political beliefs. So if you have a think about some of the patterns that belong, to perhaps the more conservative right wing or the more liberal left wing, for example. So how then do we go about starting doing critical discourse analysis? I've given you here George Bush's speech after the attacks on the Twin Towers in New York on the 11th of September in 2001. If you pause the video in a minute while you work your way through this speech, you want to pick up words here that jump out to you. You particularly want to think about the role of pronouns. So I, we, us, them, you, these types of things. What role are they having? What role are they playing within this discourse sample? You also want to think about, actually, are there vocabulary chains here? Vocab chains that present a certain picture or present a certain ideology within this text. And how is that ideology? Remember, this is a political speech, so it's designed for an audience. I've got some questions in a minute, and you're going to have to be thinking about, who is the audience within this text? So read it through and just circle the words that jump out to you, or write them down on a piece of paper. So I'm going to pause now and then read it through. Take note of the words that you feel are jumping out at you, and then restart the video when you're ready. So now that you've read the text, have a think about these questions. And again, pause the video here as you work your way through these types of questions. Okay, so I hope that went okay and that you're able to work through the text and the questions. So the questions, you've got to think about who is the discourse aimed at? Who is the receiver of this speech? And what is the intention of the speech? Who is involved? So who's, producing the discourse? Who's receiving it? And how are they involved? Are they active? Are they passive? What kind of words does the speaker use to engage with the audience? Are there particular words that link to a certain kind of theme, And what attitude does the speaker express through his words? Do we know anything about the attitude? What are they saying about how they see the world, their ideologies? Because they won't ever explicitly say my ideology is. We have to deduce it. We have to read the clues through the discourse sample. Which words play an important role in connecting the speech together? And are any parts of the speech more prominent than others? So have a go at answering these questions, again in more detail, and just pause the video and we'll come back in a second. Okay, so here I've started to highlight certain parts as well. I've picked up just very quickly different things that jumped out to me when I read the text. So part of it is pronouns. So I'm going to start off with the pronouns. So here at the beginning of the speech, we have, I's, much more I's. We don't have the I's in the second half of the speech. We also have things like our, so I have asked, I am going to describe our governments, our country, our nation, our leadership. So here you've got a president giving a speech, the most powerful person in America giving the speech. So they're saying what they've done, but then it's not saying I then did this, you've got lots of our government. This is whenever somebody uses the word our in a collective way, it's designed to bring people together. And it's designed to make people see themselves as one nation, one group of people. And this particularly works at a time of violence or a time of grief, as you have in this particular speech, because it brings people together through the violence, through the grief. And so, when people are grieving, they want a lot more, or they find that collective nouns, collective pronouns work much better. So our government, our leadership, we, this use of we as well as you move further down the speech, and all the way down to our tears, we will win it, right? So it's very much using pronouns to bring people together. And then as you read through, you'll notice that some words really do jump out at you. So on one hand, you've got vocab chains that link with grief, so tragedy, deeply affected, loss of life, tears, these all come together in order to create that kind of theme of grief. And then on the other hand, you've got terror, you've got battle, you've got war, you've got not stand, you've got smoke, you've got attack, harbour, strong determination to win, war. You've got all these kind of very aggressive military themed words here as well. So, the vocab chains are either ones focused on grief or they're ones focused on warfare. Oh, I forgot to highlight wreckage of New York. So yeah, wreckage would definitely go with that kind of linking of the vocab theme to war as well. You've also got things that really distinguish them versus us. So you've got, us, we're our government, deeply affected, we will win it, our tears, our strong determination of America, that creates the unity. But then when they're talking about them who are never named either, so we never know exactly, but we know, smoke them out of their holes, we will get them running, we will bring them to justice. Those who harbour them and feed them and house them. So here you've got what we call othering. It's where, we form together within our collective group and then we we differentiate ourselves from anybody else by othering them, by making them feel separate to us. So here the people aren't even named, the people who, were the terrorists who commandeered the planes and flew them into the Twin Towers, because at this stage I don't think they actually knew entirely who had orchestrated it. But there's this idea that they're so different from us. They live in holes, they're very different from the civilized presentation of America. And so, this is a very effective linguistic means to solidify unity within the American people over a great act of violence. But in doing that, you other anybody else who doesn't see themselves as part of that collective. But as you can see, we're working our way through the text. And what we get there, mostly we've got kind of information being given. So it's what we call declarative mood. And then highlighted here in the blue, we've got the one imperative. So imperative mood within the text. Make no mistake about it. And then we've got we will win it, right? So, here you've got declarative text, and then here you come through into your imperative, which again is, this has happened, we will do this. And then here you've got, moving forward. And it's at the end of the speech to demonstrate that it's like kind of next steps, what's going to happen. And that works, again, quite well in persuading people round to your beliefs, to share your ideology. So it's a really clever speech in that regard. Again, as well, something a bit more current. I chose two articles from the Daily Mail, which are both on the same topic about fashion, but one refers to Kate, Princess Catherine, and then one refers to Meghan Markle. And again, pause the video here and just read through these examples and circle any words that jump out to you. So just pause and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so hopefully you read through those. And again, I've just had a go here as well at just highlighting certain things that jumped out to me when I was reading the text. So again, we can see here the use of a pronoun, very beginning. So Kate's section of the text starts off with we, see a woman. So we again implies the reader and the producer of the discourse sample viewing the same thing and viewing it together. And then Kate is described as being in her prime, stylish, confident, positively radiant, nailing her outfit in the style stakes, a joy to witness, dazzling, super chic, fashionista. So here we got lots of positive appraisals about Kate Middleton. However, if we turn down to Meghan Markle's, again, it's about fashion, and again, it's from the Daily Mail, so the same paper. And if you have a look at the dates, they're literally just a few days apart from it, well, a month or so apart from each other. And then we get Meghan, proper royalty is about tradition and duty, self-effacing service and loyalty. It's written in the passive. So here we've got the active in Kate's, and this one is the passive. We know that they're referring back to Meghan, but it doesn't overtly say that. And again, she's put into juxtaposition with the monarchy and about how her behaviour isn't in line with the behaviour that a royal should do. And bearing this in mind, this is the fact that she was involved with Vogue. But Kate Middleton did the exact same thing not very long before. So what we have here is word choice about two different women, but obviously from the same royal family. But how they're referred to is very, very different. So what we would then do is we'd have a look at why that would be the case. And we'll pick this up again in the tutorial as well, where I've got other examples, all from the Daily Mail, about, how they refer to Kate in a very different way than they refer to Meghan. And again, remember, newspapers are there to be sold. They're sold to a readership who fundamentally shares their ideology. Otherwise, they wouldn't buy the paper. And so what does that say? They're reinforcing certain ideas, impressions, ideologies about these two women, and they are very different in how they do that and how they shape it. So what effect and, where do you think that stems from? I have a view, and I'm sure in the tutorial we can pick this up again as we look at more examples. But have a think, and that's something you can bring with you to the tutorial. So when we meet next in our tutorial, we will look to explore a range of texts to reconstruct the ideologies of the producer of that discourse. So just like the couple of examples we've looked at here in this video, we will explore a range of different texts from newspaper articles, adverts and speeches. You don't need to prepare anything in advance, don't worry, but do take a few minutes to work through this video and make sure that you have looked at those texts that we've covered in this video and had to think about some of the questions about the George Bush speech. And yeah, thank you very much for listening to this talk, and I really look forward to seeing you at the tutorial.